what can we do to make our region more livable? And so as you have conversations today, as you think about ideas, please put them on the board. And they don't have to be the most grandiose ideas. They can be small policy changes that frankly can have a big impact. For instance, you might have heard of Urban League's efforts to ban the box, right? Let's stop asking folks applying for housing whether or not they've been convicted of a felony, because it doesn't mean they can't have a safe housing opportunity. Those are important ideas that we need to lift up and highlight and ought to be on that board if you're thinking about them. We are also excited to have our keynote speaker here today to share some thoughts from a national perspective. But first, I want to focus on our sponsors today. I'm going to thank all of the sponsors, and then you all can clap, because there's a lot of folks. Kaiser Permanente is our presenting sponsor, and they've been a long supporter of CLF. Metro Regional Government is the major sponsor for today, a great partner. Thank you very much. Our co-sponsors are CARE Oregon, the Office of Equity and Inclusion at the Oregon Health Authority, Washington County Commissioner Dick Scouten, and 3 City of Portland bureaus: the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, the Bureau of Transportation, and the Housing Bureau. We also have some supporting sponsors: the Multnomah County Health Department, PSU's Institute for Sustainable Solutions, and United Way of the Columbia Willamette. Thank you, and please join me in a round of applause. Thank you all. With that, it is my opportunity to introduce and to welcome Molly Haynes from Kaiser Permanente to the stage. Molly is the Director of Community Health for Kaiser Permanente, where she leads in making community-based investments to improve health in the Northwest region. And I just want to point out, I've been a Kaiser member since the day I was born on Kaiser. And what has always impressed me about Kaiser is their focus not just on members, but on community health. And for those of you who didn't know, Kaiser Permanente this year was the #1 giver in philanthropy in the state of Oregon. And I think that's what
Thank you, Jesse, and good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here amongst many friends and colleagues in the audience today. And I don't know about you guys, but fall is my favorite time of year. You can't beat this weather, right? And the changing color, and as a kid, I always loved when it was back to school time. Many of you know I'm a bit of an extrovert, and so getting to see all my friends and getting in trouble for talking in class was always a good thing in September. And I will also admit that as a mom, I really like back to school time. And my husband and I had a really big decision to make over the summer. We made the decision to let our children who are in 5th and 2nd grade walk and bike home from school, from our neighborhood school together. And that was kind of a big leap for us. We've been letting them walk around the neighborhood and bike with their friends, and so kind of letting that leash get a little bit longer. And I was reflecting on this and thinking about how wonderful it is that we are fortunate enough to live in a neighborhood that we can do that we feel safe, we know our neighbors, our kids don't have any busy streets to cross on their walk home. And through a lot of efforts from the city and all the folks like you, that's just a great thing that we can do that. And I think many of us in this room live in those kind of neighborhoods. And I think we can all agree that it's absolutely not okay that not everyone lives in those kind of neighborhoods. And so I want to just reflect on the work that CLF and many of you are doing in the room to really have some urgency around this work so that we can move forward and all kids can live in neighborhoods where they can walk and bike safely, where they can play with their friends out in the streets. I might even say that, as my kids do. And I also just want to comment on the support that Kaiser Permanente has provided to CLF and the Equity Atlas, because we know that the Equity Atlas is a wonderful tool to help address the inequality in our communities. And by using maps and data, the Equity Atlas assesses how well different populations across the region can access key resources and how these patterns intersect with health outcomes. And the Equity Atlas also helps inform decision making. It spurs policy change and is an essential tool for this region. So again, I just want to thank all of you and the work that you're doing. And thanks to CLF and the Equity Atlas for helping us do this great work. Because at Kaiser Permanente, we know that health happens in neighborhoods, not in hospitals. And so we want to all work together with urgency until all kids can safely walk in back to school. And now I have the privilege of introducing this morning's keynote speaker, Dr. Antwi Akome. Dr. Antwi Akome has been a social change activist within low-income and communities of color for over 20 years. He is an associate professor of environmental sociology, public health, and STEM education at San Francisco State University, and is the co-founder of the Institute for Sustainable Economic, Educational, and Environmental Design, which focuses on building sustainable cities and schools. Professor Akome's research focuses on the links between race, environmental health, and educational equity, on the role of the green economy in facilitating pathways out of poverty, and on the role of local knowledge in creating healthy communities. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Akome.
Greetings, flash mob. I love that. That was so great. Oh, flash mob. So what I've come to talk to you about today is innovation out of poverty, and how can we build a more participatory and inclusive climate justice movement. So I've got a lot that I want to cover. We're going to really talk about equity with a capital E. The first part, I'm going to sort of outline what I see as some of the challenges and the problems. And the second part of my talk today, I'm going to really get into some of the solutions. So the problem of the 21st century, for me, is the problem of climate justice. And in particular, the ways in which the climate justice movement responds to growing racial, gender, and socioeconomic inequality. Long before Hurricane Sandy, low-income communities and communities of color from West Harlem to East Los Angeles, from the Cancer Alley that runs from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, all the way to New Orleans, or from the Toxic Triangle, where I do my own work, which runs from Richmond, California, all the way down through Berkeley and across to San Francisco, Bayview Hunters Point. Long before Hurricane Sandy or any of these natural disasters, we knew low-income communities, communities of color, immigrant communities, we knew that there was a health wealth gap. We knew that there were eco-haves and eco-have-nots. We knew that race and class played a role in terms of who gets left behind with respect to housing, healthcare, education, and so on. But what any natural disaster does, right, and I'm thinking about the heat wave in Chicago and Eric Kleinenberg's work, is it blows the lid off of environmental racism and the color-coded ways in which our governments respond to some of our most vulnerable populations. And I start there. Oh, do we start there? Okay. I start there because even though climate change or climate destabilization is the problem of the 21st century, there is a second climate crisis growing alongside the first with equally devastating effects and similar social origins. It is the crisis of our human imagination. It is the crisis of our human mobilization. It is the crisis of human intervention. And there I'm talking about and thinking about policy. In particular, how policy impacts low-income communities, communities of color, and immigrant communities. But it is the crisis of our educational system. and our inability to see the relationship between our educational system, the collapse of our educational system, and economic justice. So we have two climate crises happening at the same time, both with devastating consequences for the future of the planet. We have the collapse of our ecological systems, and we have the collapse of our educational systems. But there's not enough conversation about the relationship between the two. There's not enough conversation about how does the environment impact our schools and our school children. Yet, we have lead in the paint. We have arsenic in the water. We have PCBs in the windows. We have asbestos in the ceilings and in the floors. We're at a point where the building stock in many urban and rural schools is so dilapidated and so dysfunctional that it's creating what I call toxic toddlers. Right? We're at a point where the very food and school lunches that we are feeding our children is what Jonathan Kozel refers to as causing death at an early age. And of course, I think it's in part responsible for the obesity epidemic that is sweeping this country. I call all of this eco-apartheid because it's not just happening in our schools, it's happening in our communities, and there are racial, class, and gender dimensions. Now, what do I mean by eco-apartheid? Eco-apartheid is a systems theory that examines the ecological impacts of structural racialization. It highlights the ways that structures, institutions cumulatively cause or produce unequal environmental outcomes and other benefits and burdens based on race, class, gender, language, immigration status, as well as their intersectionalities. So what does that mean? Because that's a lot. Okay, it's like, okay, eco-apartheid, okay. All right, so this is what I mean by eco-apartheid. And really remember, we're talking about cumulative causation, right? So all of you right now use your eco-imagination, and all of you are dark-skinned African Americans who look like me, proud to be black. I could have you say I'm black and I'm proud, but I won't go there. Stay in your eco-imagination. You're dark-skinned African Americans and you're living in West Oakland. That's your neighborhood, okay? And remember, we're talking about eco-apartheid and we're talking about cumulative causation. So you're living in West Oakland, and how many grocery stores are in your neighborhood in West Oakland?
0.
Could be 0. Others?
Not enough.
Give me numbers, people. 3, 2, 1. Right. So in your neighborhood, there is one grocery store. Okay? How many liquor stores are in your neighborhood? 20? 50? Right? So, depending on how you draw the boundaries of your community, okay, there's between 50 and 60 liquor stores in your community. Right? Now, you all are hungry. You're on your way to school. You want to get something to eat. Where are you going to go? The liquor store. And when you go to the liquor store, what kind of food are you going to eat? Give me more than garbage. You know what your kids eat, my kids eat, right? Takis, Cheetos, right? All this kinds of stuff, chips, right? And so now you go to school, and what is the race and the gender of the majority of people who teach in urban schools? White females. Now, this part isn't totally racialized because I believe that white females can absolutely educate children of color. And it really is about the heart and the quality of the teacher that matters most. But I want to note who's teaching in those schools, because I also think that that does matter. And I think you think that it matters because you look like me. And you're sitting in that classroom, and you just had a bunch of potato chips, and you just drank some soda. And now you're in that classroom, and you're getting a little fidgety in class. And what is the general diagnosis for you, children? There you go. You said it. I didn't even have to say it. Right? That is cumulative causation. So all that blah, blah, blah that you heard matters. Right? That is eco-apartheid. That is cumulative causation. Right? So what? why is this important? Who cares? Well, the significance of eco-apartheid is threefold. First, it suggests that environmental bads like toxic waste are in communities of color, while environmental goods such as Whole Foods, open space, and parks are in wealthier communities. Is that true, Portland?
Yes.
Absolutely true here. Second, eco-apartheid is a more powerful definition than environmental racism, precisely because it captures inequalities beyond race, including space, place, and waste. For example, the urban grocery gap, the transportation gap, the produce gap, while simultaneously centering race and racism. Third, eco-apartheid captures the political, historical, and spatial dimensions of racial inequality. And this is critical when we talk about issues of development and underdevelopment being equity issues. That is, the history of America, the history of the United States, is the history of systematic, institutionalized racial privilege for white people and white-looking people. Right? That's critical. Because whenever I say white people in California, at least, and nationally start feeling guilty. I'm not guilting you out, right? I'm telling the truth. And we need to have this conversation, right? And the whole reason why many folks had to switch on the census, right? These are people of color, right? Latinos, right, want to try to be white so that they can access institutional resources and privileges. Black folks who look lighter skinned would pass a brown bag test, not because they didn't love being black, but because they wanted to access institutional resources and privileges. Why? Because the history of America is the history of systematic, institutionalized racial privilege for white folks and white-looking folks. Whether I am talking about the Naturalization Act of 1790, the first law passed after the Constitution was ratified, which said that whites and whites only could be free citizens of the United States. Or whether I'm talking about the Homestead Act of 1862, which guaranteed white folks 160 acres of land for $10. For $10, right? And you, children, people who look like you, couldn't get 40 acres and a mule, right? Or whether I'm talking about federally subsidized, federally underwritten, federally guaranteed FHA and VHA loans. On the backs of those loans was the creation of the white middle class. And when you do that for black folks and people of color, you call it welfare. But when you do it for white folks, you call it good, sound economic policy. You can clap on that. I would clap on that. I mean, why not? And because of this systematic, institutionalized racial privilege, the average white family has 20 times the net worth of the average black family. 18 times the average net worth of the average Latino family. And this is key, right? Not solely because of hard work, right? Not solely because of better morals, not solely because of better values, not solely because folks are more qualified, right? Some of those things are true, but some of them aren't, right? But more so because of systematic, institutionalized, intergenerational racial privilege passed from one generation to the next, right? This is happening here and everywhere, and it's within living memory, okay? My flash mob, this is within living memory. My own grandmother, who lives here in Gladstone, Oregon, okay? Yeah, from Gladstone. She lives here in Gladstone, Oregon. She was not able to buy her own home. Okay, she's 94 years old. Her birthday was last Sunday, so that's beautiful. We'll give it up. Grandma, love you, Grandma. But she was not able to buy her own home, right? And this shows the importance of us all working together. She had to find a well-meaning white person, right, who would buy the home for her, right? So it's great that you all exist, right? Right now we're out of the eco-imagination for a minute, but when you think about how demeaning that is, right? For now, go back into your eco-imagination, for you as grown-ups, right? To work your whole life, right? To really build something special. And to be in that situation where you can't even buy a home, right? Because of the redlining and the racial discrimination in the real estate industry, right? And we all know that home ownership is one of the #1 ways of passing on wealth to our children, right? So I wanna underscore that this is important in terms of wealth, but staying in your eco-imagination, what is happening to your health, right? What is happening to your life expectancy? What is happening when you grow up in that neighborhood in West Oakland in terms of being located and having to go to school in a sick school, right? In terms of the lunches that are being fed to you, right? Instead of a healthy school, right? We're talking about, and Mara talks about regional equity, we're talking about whole regions of winners, right? And whole regions of losers, right? So what does eco-apartheid look like in the Bay Area? Manuel Pastor's a professor who I work with at USC, and he's a brilliant man, and in fact, he should be your next speaker. He's amazing. Or a speaker in the future, whatever. But this is a map of basically toxic release inventory plants, right? Smokestacks. And so the red dots are where the smokestacks are located, and the gray areas are where people of color live, such that black folks are 3 times more likely to live next to a smokestack, right? Latinos are 2 times more likely, and Asian Americans 1.5 times more likely. And what the medical research is absolutely unequivocally clear on what this is doing to your bodies, right? There's a weathering effect of being raced in America. And the weathering effect says that there's negative physiological impacts of living in a race-conscious society. There's negative physiological impacts when I walk down the street, when you walk down the street. I love keeping you in this eco-imagination. When you walk down the street and somebody walks to the other side, right? When you walk down the street or go into a store and somebody starts following you, right? What it does to all of you, and you know this because you're experiencing it, but what they don't know, right, is that it's stressing you out. And what does stress do to our bodies? It's really clear. On the left-hand side is a healthy vein, right? On the right-hand side is what a vein looks like that's all clogged up because of the cortisol that's been released into your system. Where's Molly? Molly's over here somewhere. Anyway, she knows all about this. There. Hey, Molly. Right. And so on the right-hand side is what your vein looks like when it's all stressed out, your arteries get clogged. And isn't it ironic, brothers and sisters, that that vein looks like Africa? I mean, it's just ironic, right? But that's basically who it's impacting the most, right? So, you know, the crazy thing about it is that these are life and death issues that we're talking about. And so there's a life expectancy gap that's going on that we all need to be aware of. This is just some quick data from the Bay Area. But basically, if you live in the Berkeley Hills, which I actually happen to live in, and I love Berkeley, right? Folks who live in the Berkeley Hills will live 10.9 years longer than if you lived in the Oakland Flatlands, right? If you live in Bayview Hunters Point, right, which is pretty much a very similar community to where you all live in West Oakland, the bad news for you all is that you live 14.1 years less, right, than somebody who lives in Russian Hill. So we have not correctly identified the problem. We do not have an achievement gap, and you should never use that term, right? So the first takeaway term here was eco-apartheid, right? Cumulative causation. The second one is don't talk about an achievement gap, call it an opportunity gap. An achievement gap implies inequalities based on cultural or genetic difference, which you all know you don't have any of that, right? An opportunity gap remaps inequalities onto existing structural conditions. So if we see it as an opportunity gap, then we have to ask ourselves, what is happening to those who don't get in to school, right? Now, the United States has 5% of the world's population, but 20% of the world's prisoners. That means 1 out of every 4 people locked up anywhere on the planet is locked up in a United States jail or prison. Most are poor, black, and Latino. But let's see what it looks like for African American males, 18 to 24 years old. This graph basically shows that there are 6,886 black males locked up in the California Department of Corrections, right? There are 1,606 black males in the UC system, right? Not UC Berkeley, right? Not UCLA, right? The entire UC system, okay? Remember, we're talking about economic justice here and the relationship between the failure of our educational system and these real pathways to prosperity, right? There are 4,187 black males in the CSU system, and of course you already know that the CSU system is the largest educational system in the world, right? So basically, there's more black males locked up than in the UC system and the CSU system combined. And what is happening to those black males who do get into schools, right? What happens to those black males that go to UC Berkeley as an undergrad, have a master's degree from Stanford University, and a PhD from an Ivy League institution? Do they succeed? So who's this? That's me. Do I look happy? Hell no, I am not happy. I am pissed off, right? I'm very angry. I'm angry because on October 26, 2005, I was falsely arrested and my civil rights were violated. Why? Because I went to and anyone who does a cursory Google search of me will see this, right? I went to my own office at night to get books to prepare for class. That was it. That was my crime. Shame on me. Shame, right? And of course, everyone knows how I roll. This is how I dress. I dressed up today for you guys. Right? So this is just how I dress because this reminds me of sort of where I'm from, right? Single parent, female-headed household, right? My hair is my roots. This keeps me grounded. And I go with my 2 children, who are 5 and 7, okay, to campus. At that time, I was a single dad. And it's like 9 o'clock at night. I drive across the Bay Bridge. My children fall asleep, etc. So now I have this dilemma situation going on, right? I've got my 2 kids. I need to get those books in my office. I really don't want to wake up my children, right? So I've never left my children before. They'll tell you I'm like Mr. Strict Dad, right? Their mom leaves them all the time, right? At that age. Go figure. Right? She's a beautiful woman. I'm not condemning her. I'm just talking about our different parenting styles. I said I was a single dad, right? Anyway. But the point is, I park the car and I say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to run upstairs. I'm going to go and get these books, and I'm going to be back. And literally, let's say, you're downstairs, we're talking about on the first floor, right? So I'm like, I can do this. I'm fast, I'm in shape. I can do this in like a minute 30, maybe 3 minutes max. So lock the car door, run upstairs. Unusual evening in that there was a security guard by the door this time, right? I had never seen that before, but of course I didn't pay any attention to it. Fly past the security guard, get to my office, open it up, come out of my office. I have my books in my hand, and there's a police officer, right? A young 22-year-old police officer, right? And ironically, the San Francisco State Police Department had asked me to do the cultural competency training for the police department. So there he is, and I'm not going to get into all the details, but basically he says, you know, put your hands behind your back. Now, mind you, my office is like right here, and it says, Antwia Calm. So I'm like, and I learned, he said, you know, put your hands behind your back. And I said, well, why? Right now all of you, my West Oakland brothers and sisters, know, do not say why. I'm serious. Do everything that they said. Right? This is what I learned, but I had to learn in a very challenging way, right? So, you know, I said why. He's like, oh, put your hands behind your back. And then he knocks the books out of my hands. He drops to his knees, and he starts trying to wrestle me down. So now he's got his hands around my knees. I'm like teetering like a tree about to topple, sort of balancing on him. And, you know, there's another group of people, you know, about 3 tables back here sort of watching all this. And I'm like, help, help. Right? And they're like, so this rookie police officer then calls in reinforcements. 2 black cops come running up the stairs. Now I'm surrounded by these 3 cops. 1 cop pulls out mace. I'm looking at I said, put the mace down, man. What is going on? Relax, everybody, just relax, right? And I gotta get to my car, right? I gotta go. You are interfering with my parenting responsibilities, right? They're like, oh, okay, we'll let you go, you know, we just want to handcuff you. Why? Right? We just want to handcuff you, ask you a few questions. Okay, you know, at first I'm like, no. Then I'm like, look, do what you need to do. I need to get to that car. So I let them handcuff me, right? Do they lead me to the car? No. Next thing I know, I'm in the back of a police car, right? Sitting there. And my kids are still in the car, and I'm mad about it, right? Now, I need you all to go into your eco-imaginations again, because at this moment is when I really realized just how horrific slavery was, just how horrific the Holocaust was, right? Just how horrific what we've done to indigenous folks really was, right? Because to be torn away from your children, right? The level of and imagine for you all, right? Your brothers, your sisters, your mom. Can you imagine somebody like selling your mom? Go into your eco-imagination, feel it. The emotions are deep. I mean, deep. And it makes you feel things you've never felt before, right? On so many different levels, right? And I'm in that police car feeling all those kinds of feelings, right? So they allow me to make 1 phone call, or they're going to take my children to Child and Protective Services, right? And so, you know, I make the phone call, a friend of mine comes in, they haul me off to jail, right? And for a long time, I was sort of the poster boy for the professor who had been incarcerated, right? And, you know, the good news about this story in terms of us all working together was, there was a number of amazing things. The flash mob came to save me. The students protested, right? Like mobilization matters, right? The community rallied. I had John Kecker, who was a lawyer who prosecuted for the Iran-Contra affair, came in and voluntarily pro bonoed me to represent me, right? Which was just amazing, right? No one expected that. And then the university kept going with this, Like they were really, as often happens, fear bubbled to the top, right? Rather than just calm and peace and reason, right? And so, all I wanted was an apology. That's it. I wasn't seeking money. I wasn't thinking litigation or lawsuit, right? That's not what I was thinking. I just wanted somebody to say, wow, that must have hurt your feelings. That was really jacked. We're sorry, right? Instead, they got Willie Brown to come in and do an independent, like the kind of independent investigation that they're doing in Ferguson, right? Like all those kinds of independent So Willie Brown does an independent investigation and finds that I did something. And I'm like, what did I do? Right? In the police report, which are always really honest, really accurate, right? The 22-year-old had said that I had picked him up and body slammed him and cracked his head. And, when we got to court, the judge was like, well, where are the wounds? He's like, right? But at that point, I was up for 4 felonies, right? Right? And, the biggest thing was I had a family, so the university sort of kept pushing this for a while, and then I had a family who basically, a very wealthy family, like a family that perhaps has more money than the whole CSU system, came in and said, you know what, Answeet, we got you back. We're going to fund anything you need. And that is when the university sort of said, okay, hey, you're kind of cool. Welcome back to our community, right? And so, at first, I was the poster boy for the professor who had been incarcerated. And then when Henry Louis Gates, a professor at Harvard, went through his drama, I became the expert on racial profiling. Right? So this is, me on the PBS NewsHour, and I was fielding phone calls from all over the country about, hey, racial profiling, and how does this happen, and what can we do to really prevent it? And so I share this story because I want to have a serious conversation about equity, and I really want us to all understand that race subsumes social class, right? Cornel West, another professor at Harvard, and now he's at Princeton, he talks about in his book, Race Matters, not being able to get a cab in New York City, right? So you can have all of these degrees, you can have unbelievable success, personal success, but the color of your skin can still impact your access to institutional resources and privileges. And we can't forget that when we're talking about equity, right? And looking at things through an equity lens. Of course, we all know that there's racism in the heart of liberalism. We need to be reminded, and particularly the sustainability movement, right, that we racially profile, not on purpose per se, and sometimes on purpose, but whole communities, right? And that's part of what happens when we are going through gentrification, right? And for the communities themselves, they would say gentrification is just another word for ethnic cleansing. And then finally, this could have happened to any of us, and every day it happens to many of us. So what can be done, right? Van Jones talks about, what if we build a movement at the intersection of social justice and the ecology movements, of entrepreneurship and activism, of interchange and social change? What if we didn't just have hybrid cars? What if we had a hybrid social movement, right? And building a hybrid climate justice movement means putting the power back in the hands of everyday people, right? Taking equity and inclusion seriously in policy and in our daily practices. Development without displacement, understanding how important placemaking is and community organizing, and making sure that we fund and support placemaking and community organizing. My friends and colleagues from eco-districts are here. I hope Lynn Barker and Amaka Agbo. And eco-districts is doing some amazing work around building district energy, smart grids, green streets, and all of those things are critical. They're critical, but we we have to do these things while using the word equity, but at the same time, we can't be afraid to use the word race, right? And what's going on is that we sort of are starting to proxy this equity lens because we're really afraid to say race, right? We're really afraid to say gender. We're really afraid to talk about sexual orientation, right? So we're sort of lobbing this equity out there because it feels softer, right? It feels easier to digest, right? But we're not really hitting the heart of the matter, right? And the heart of the matter is, how do we help our communities, our most marginalized populations, our most vulnerable populations? How do we help them innovate their way out of poverty, right? And when I talk about innovation out of poverty, I say that because right now, we do not have smart cities and we don't have shareable cities. Okay? We don't have smart cities and we don't have shareable cities because everyone knows that where bike share ends and car share ends, the hood and the barrio and the ghetto begin. And this is a sign of, it says roadway not improved. And, I was talking to a CLF friend who was telling me how, in East Portland, there are these signs that say unimproved roads, right? Now, that's what we're talking about here. It's like, first of all, that is a hilarious sign. I mean, let's just pause and think about that. Unimproved road. Well, as my grandmother fell and broke her knee, thanks for telling me. I mean, we know the road is a dirt road, right? Come and improve the road, right? We don't need a sign saying unimproved road, right? But the point is, this is what many of our communities are experiencing. So what we need to do, Flash Mob, as a sustainability movement, is we're not doing a good enough job of focusing our energy on what's happening in low-income communities, communities of color, and immigrant communities, right? And if we want to look at the economic justice side of it, in the U.S. alone, that's a $45 billion to $1 trillion market, right, that we're overlooking. And up here, I have Target and Walmart, because guess what Target and Walmart understand really well? The power of targeting low-income communities and communities, the economic power, right? So they build right there. They're willing to go in and serve you all in West Oakland. They're like, oh yeah, here's a Target, here's a Walmart, come on in, right? There's something we can learn from that as part of our sustainability movement. And so there's real gaps in the smart city and climate smart movement. One is, how do we seek public input from folks that look like you all, right? That talk differently than maybe any of us in this room. Who gets to be at the table? Who do we even define as the public, right? And who has voice and who doesn't when we're talking about community benefit agreements? And as we, one of the challenges for all of us in this room to think about is, how do we design and redesign our smart cities of the future? Will we redesign them for rich people or for poor people? For eco-haves or eco-have-nots? For people of color or for white folks? And who will have a say in how we redesign our smart cities of the future? Will it be powerful elites or everyday people? For the past several years, my research and scholarship is really focused on two things. How do we democratize data? That is, how can we provide more open, mobile, and accessible and transparent ways to make cities smarter? And how do we democratize decision-making so that the same usual suspects that come to a community meeting are not the ones who are making the decisions? In other words, I've really been working on how do we innovate our way out of poverty, and how can innovation out of poverty and cutting-edge technology help solve some of our greatest social problems. And I want to sort of just do a quick history lesson. I have about 10, 15 minutes left here. Do you all know who this man is? If you didn't see his name. Anyway, this is Dr. Charles Drew. And one of the big challenges that Dr. Drew was facing and he grew up during a time of racial segregation and Jim Crow, was that we believed in this silly notion at that time that white folks needed white people to give them blood, and black folks needed black people to give them blood, and so on and so forth, right? And so Dr. Drew's big idea was, why don't we have a large-scale blood bank where we can all share blood, right? And that's part of what I mean by an innovation out of poverty framework, right? And so he revolutionizes the way that we do blood transfusion. This is Maria Gonzalez, and she's a Mexican pharmacologist, and one of the big challenges she was facing was that too many black and brown folks were dying of malaria. And so she came up with an anti-parasitic drug that could cure that.
Good morning, my name is Morgan Dixon. I'm out for my morning walk. I'm a part of an organization called Girl Trek that has rallied and mobilized 10,000 black women and girls to take a step out and to walk for their health together across the country from our communities out of the front door. We walk 5 days a week, 30 minutes a day, for 8 weeks straight to restart, jumpstart, kickstart healthier lives and to combat these statistics that say we're going to die earlier, younger, at higher rates than any other group in the country. 4 out of 5 of us are over a healthy weight. All of this is preventable. We know that walking changes things. When black women walk together, it has always changed things. When women in Montgomery walked, it changed. When Harriet Tubman walked, it changed. And when we walk, things will change. I look forward to telling you more about this incredible organization. 10,000 women are on the streets now, from places like Chattanooga to Detroit, and we are walking it out for our health. Look forward to talking to you more.
Girl Trek is another organization that is just doing phenomenal work. And if we visualize what innovation looks like globally, right, and this is a picture of innovation from outer space. It's really easy to see where the innovation is happening, right? I mean, where you see that light, where you see electricity, that's where it isn't. Okay? That's where it isn't. Right? Now, when you look at Africa, when you look at Latin America, many places in the Far East, that's where some really powerful innovation is taking place, right? Don't take me literally. There's always that person who says, but there is innovation in America. Yes, there is. But you get the point. Innovation out of poverty is happening in many of our poorest communities. And look, there's 3.9 million children that are growing up in areas of concentrated poverty, right? That's 2.5 times the size of Manhattan. And worldwide, in wealthy countries, there are 30 million children growing up in areas of neighborhoods of concentrated poverty, right? Now, let me be clear about what I'm saying. That means no matter how hard these young people work in school, no matter how hard their parents work to get ahead, the single greatest determinant of their life chances, of their lifespan, of their command over resources is the zip code that they're born into. This is a crisis. This is a crisis. This is a moral crisis because nobody should be able to tell you, right, based on where you were born or where you live, how long you're going to live, when you're going to die, if you're going to fail in school, or if you're going to succeed. But it's also a financial crisis because we're spending $63.4 billion on the prison industrial complex instead of upstream solutions like innovating our way out of poverty. There's also the reality of shifting demographics in the United States. As all of you know, by the year 2050, the United States will be 54% majority minority, right? So that means it's happening, it's coming. And this has really profound consequences socially, politically, economically, and culturally. And then when you begin to look at millennials, globally, 50% of the population is under the age of 27, right? And these folks represent a $1.6 trillion market. Thinking about economic justice and how do we really build pathways to prosperity with these particular populations, right? We're seeing an innovation. The point is, we're seeing innovation in places that we never dreamed. And because we never dreamed it, we can't imagine it. And because we can't imagine it, we don't have the social and the cultural skill set to tap into it. But what would happen if we did have the social and cultural skill set to tap into it? These are the kinds of questions that an Innovation Out of Poverty framework is asking. Could this app have saved the lives of Trayvon Martin, or could an app, period, save the lives of Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown? My student at San Francisco State answered yes to this, right? And she realized that Trayvon Martin, when he was murdered, he was actually on the telephone. And that his life could have been saved had he had an app that had a preloaded text message to family, friends, and the police. So she built one, and it's called Help Circle. And I see the organization that I co-founded and am now executive director. We have been building game-changing apps, tools for communities to innovate, cities to become smarter, communities to collaborate. And we've created something called a streetwise score that I'm about to show you that we think will be as important as how many beds and baths does a particular home have for a neighborhood. So what is Streetwise? Streetwise is a mobile mapping and SMS platform that provides real-time data about how people are using cities and services. What we do is we really believe that local knowledge makes all the difference, and that community-driven data is really the missing link. And yes, having census data is great, right? But census data is like 10 years old, right? So it's not in real time about what's really happening on the ground. Having healthy kids data is fantastic, but it's not in real time about what's happening on the ground. Google Earth is not in real time, right? So what we've created is a feedback system that builds community capacity and can drive policy by giving you real-time data. Streetwise does things like it tells you how walkable is your neighborhood, okay? How well is it served by public transit? What are the hot spots and the cool spots for crime? And where does the community believe that we should put next generation green infrastructure? It functions very similarly to Yelp, but the challenge with Yelp is 67% of Yelp users are white. Meaning, again, low-income communities, communities of color, immigrant communities are not using it. And Yelp tends to focus on leisure services, whereas Streetwise focuses on life services. There's another phenomenal app called SeeClickFix that connects people to government, but our app connects people to people and people to government. So, perhaps Tim O'Reilly said it best. He talked about government should behave more like a web platform where citizens can actively participate in creating and consuming the content of improving public space. Now this is one example of how Streetwise puts the power back in the hands of everyday people. This is an example of the number of so-called grocery stores that are located in East Oakland. Okay? And as you can see, East Oakland, where you all live, is a veritable food oasis, right? But when you use the Streetwise platform, of course, you find out what all of you already knew, which was those aren't really grocery stores, they're actually liquor stores, right? When you ground truth the data. And the next slide is going to be one of the students who we worked with, who was using the Streetwise platform, narrating the digital story about the kind of food access she has in her neighborhood.
Okay, so what are you, let's see, are you looking at, how was it when you went inside?
It was dirty when I went inside, and I would never eat anything in there. Hell no. Because they don't sell any groceries, and it's just a bunch of junk food in there. And I mean, they have little sandwiches, but I would never eat that because it's dirty. And then all the fruit is all like old, like wrinkly and looks old. And then all the like meat that they did have, like the bacon and all that in the little thing, looks like it's been sitting in there for about a year or something like that. I wouldn't call it grocery store at all. So, hell no, wouldn't eat there.
And so digital storytelling is really important because we need mechanisms, and CLF's equity storytelling does this really well. We need mechanisms to be able to communicate with each other, best practices across time and space. And so that's something that the Streetwise platform does as well. But the real innovation of our tool is that current tools like WalkScore do not measure how many cracks there are in the concrete, or how many lanes of traffic a young mother or a father or an old mother or a father have to cross on their way to school. And of course, they don't differentiate between the different types of amenities in a neighborhood, right? So lots of folks are using WalkScore. You might get a WalkScore of like 98, right? You all living in West Oakland have a really high WalkScore. But what that means is you're surrounded by liquor stores, right? It doesn't really tell you anything. Right? And so part of the innovation of the Streetwise platform is that it's giving you the most accurate representation of what's happening on the ground level, and it's allowing more accurate public data sets, as like I just showed you in the past slide, the public data set from the Alameda County Department of Public Health. Skip this slide. So part of the value of Streetwise is that it creates more democratic models of civic engagement. It gives communities a way to collect, analyze, and share data. It's a bottom-up, community-based participatory research process where local knowledge meets community design. It supports equitable development of workforce, housing, retail ecosystems, as well as transit-oriented development. It helps prioritize public investment, and it's one of the ways to create a more sustainable, shareable, and equitable community. So we recently got funding to launch our platform in 8 cities across the United States. In San Diego, they were able to use the Streetwise platform, and they found arsenic in the water. And the successful policy win was to argue for safer drinking water and water fountains in the school. In Merced, they found a transportation gap where folks in low-income communities were having to bus over an hour and a half to get groceries, and so they were able to move the bus stops to a much closer location to where the community actually lives. And in East Oakland, I showed you access to healthy food. So there's 75 million Americans that are going to need access to social services, right? That's 1 out of every 4 of you in this room. Wouldn't it be great if there was a place where you could go to get started, where you could also be politically and civically engaged, where you could find out about jobs, safe routes to school, next generation green infrastructure? Well, there is. Her name is Streetwise, and she's smart, she's tough, she's analytical, and she's connected, and she knows just about everyone in the city. Her vision is to build sustainable cities and schools so that no one has to leave their community in order to live, learn, work, and thrive. Thank you very much. So we're going to take about 10 minutes or so, 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A. So this is a great opportunity to get up and stretch your legs if you feel like it. And also, the mic is over here for Q&A. They're actually going to bring the mic to you, so you don't even have to walk over there. Just raise your hand and somebody will come to you with the mic.
Hi, thank you so much. That was very powerful, and thank you for the incredible work you're doing. So I'm a bit of a Luddite. I don't have like technologically advanced phone. So is Streetwise an app, or I just Google searched it and didn't find it?
Yeah, So you Google searched it and didn't find it because we're developing it in many of the same ways that Apple works. So if you went to find the Apple iPhone 7, you wouldn't find it, right? Because they're like, right? So when we launch it, you'll be able to find it, right? But it does exist, and we're using it in targeted ways with communities that are interested. And so we're happy to demo the tool for you, and you could use it in your community if you were interested. To answer your first question, Streetwise is a mobilely responsive app. And so that means that it can work on an iPhone or an Android phone. So it's agnostic to the kind of phone that you have. It works on smartphones, and remember, it's mobile, mapping, and an SMS platform. So it also works on dumb phones, right? Which are the old phones that some of us still have, right? And then there's also a paper component, because I think many times we are thinking about, when we talk about equity, we want our communities to talk about the problems, and we're not necessarily thinking about cultural assets, or community assets, or economic assets. So there's a paper map component where folks can map the assets in their community as well. Thank you for the question. Other questions? CLF.
Harley Sachs, Elders in Action. As a PS on your arrest, did you end up suing and getting a couple $1 million?
You know, I didn't. I wish I would have. You know, it was gonna be such a battle to go through, and I think this is something else that I've learned, to sue them, that I just decided I didn't want to use my time and energy in that way. And so I settled with them out of court, and I did not get a couple of $1 million. I don't even think I got $1,000, to be honest with you, right? So there was no big payday for that. There was really just a lot of trauma, right? There was a lot of trauma for me, a lot of trauma for my family. There's really no happy ending to that story. It just really woke me up to how deep racial profiling is, and then since that, to see it continue happening over and over again, right? And you know, the ironic thing was there's so many good people that came out to support me, but part of it energized me. So I go into jail, and I'm in jail, and of course, I'm a professor, so I'm professing, right? And I'm saying, you know, how did you get in here, and tell me your story, and you know, have you heard about this book, and you need to read this, and have you read it, and blah, blah, blah. You know, and you know, people are like, yeah, I read that book, and you should read this one. And what I learned was, you know, there's so many people, way more than I was aware of, who were falsely arrested or unjustly incarcerated, right? And that there's real genius in our jails, right? That we're really not tapping into. And so it was when I was in jail that I really started to think about, I need to write a grant that can work with formerly incarcerated folks and really build pathways to out of poverty for this particular population. And so I went and I did, and I got a $500,000 grant specifically to work with that population and really help transform their lives. And so the good that came out of it was that kind of good, right? And that's probably what should happen. Another question. I see one here. Oh, yes. Where are you?
Me, right here.
Oh, hi, me.
Hi there. Hi, my name is Andrea, and I'm a policy advisor for Commissioner Novick. He's commissioner in charge of transportation here. So first, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your presentation. I think it was just really useful and powerful. But my question is, my question is about one of these last topics that you mentioned about Streetwise. You said that the app actually helped with some of these issues about the arsenic in the water, Oakland and its access to healthy food, and then you also mentioned just the transportation gap and really getting some of those folks to shorter transportation times. I'm kind of just wondering about how that policy shift happened, and I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about particularly maybe the organizing or mobilizing that happened once that data was available, how that was used by community, but also how policymakers reacted and what really was that process to make that change.
Sure, great question. So originally we talked about Streetwise before it got to the name Streetwise, and Streetwise was really folks like you saying, hey, you should call it Streetwise, right? We started off calling it like building thriving environments and communities or something, right? And I was just like, yeah, that was mine. Of course, I made that up. And I was like, yeah! You know, and it's like, no one wants to use something called building thriving environments and communities, right? So, you know, I had to learn, like, okay, that's not how it works. And my grandmother needs to be able to use this, right? The high school students that I teach on a regular basis need to be able to use this. And then we started to think about how do we build a mapping tool that can help mobilize communities, right? And one of the major things that comes up for communities is, and we were talking about this last night at dinner with Joanne and others, is that they say, hey, you don't have any data to support your assertion. Right, so we're not going to change the policy because all of your evidence is anecdotal, right? And so that really got us thinking about, all right, how can community-driven data be collected on an ongoing basis that moves past anecdotal data and in real time, and that can have multiple data layers, right? So you could have the TRI facility data, but TRI data, that's back to the toxic release inventory stuff, is great, but it's only for stationary emissions. What about all the mobile emissions that are polluting our communities, right? What about laundromats? What about the diesel truck that's idling by the port, right? What about all these things that are causing my kids to have asthma? And so that, again, that pushed us to iterate the platform even more. And we began thinking about, ooh, this community data could be feeding into the TRI data, and then you have these really neat multiple data layers, right, that can really impact public health, especially for both individually and from a community health perspective. And so once you get the data, there's many different things that can happen with it, but part of what's happened with it is people take the data and you turn it into vision statements for the community, right? So you might take the food data and be like, wow, we actually have a food desert here. And then that can turn into having community gardens or school gardens, right? You take a vision statement of what the community really wants, and you begin building that out from the data that you've gathered in the platform. In Denver, we've talked about, so the community, this is all about the community driving this from the bottom up. So the community will say, we have a real issue with childhood obesity here. And the Denver Housing Authority is really, in my view, one of the most progressive housing authorities in the country. And so they've said, okay, we want to build new affordable housing in this community. Well, you can use our platform to find out what the community need is. In this case, it might be childhood obesity. And then when you're building the new affordable housing unit, instead of putting elevators in, maybe you put stairs in, right? That make people actually walk, and it actually impacts the obesity epidemic that's plaguing our community. So those are some of the ways in which the platform itself can lead to vision statements, goals, policy objectives, and impact the built environment. And offline, I'd be happy to share many more if that wasn't enough to address your question. Next question.
Okay, thank you. This has been really inspiring, and I desperately hope that your Streetwise app gets out to our community as well. But on my bus ride in this morning, I sat next to an old friend of mine named Charlie Stevens, and some of you might know him. I think he's one of the more brilliant thinkers in our state on energy efficiency. And also banking and the 1% and how the hierarchy and income inequality and all of those issues. And as always, he depressed the hell out of me because I said, I'm going to this wonderful gathering today about a livable future and the kinds of things that we've been talking about. And he said, yeah, but you can't really affect anything because the 1%, controls everything. And ultimately, they rule, they have resources, they have the power. Help. Is there a way to bring that message to, or take the power from the 1%? And what are we doing? Are we just moving little pieces around while they hold the strings? Big question, sorry, but cheer me up.
I think it's a great question. I mean, I really hoped I tried to really cover that question in this presentation. This presentation is full of hope and full of aspirations. And my father lives in Ghana, West Africa, and he's Ghanaian, and I'm half Ghanaian, and I've spent a lot of time there. And something that I really learned was just how happy, how hardworking these people were in the absolute most destitute poverty, right? And it got me thinking about how transformation takes place, right? And when I think about innovating out of poverty and Charles Drew and Girl Trek, right? What I'm seeing is that in spite of the 1% controlling all the resources, social change has always happened and been powered by the few, right? A few good people get together and create a mass movement. And a mass movement can change everything. Everyday people coming together can change everything. We've seen it happen here in terms of the women's movement, in terms of the civil rights movement, right? I could go on and on and on down the line. We've seen it happen more recently when I think about the Arab Spring and what happened in Egypt, right? So, to me, yes, the 1% have a lot of power, but people really have the power. The power is really in the hands of us. And it's really how we come together and work together that makes all the difference. And that's how I would respond to your friend. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Alan Leto with TriMet. I wonder if you could talk just for a moment about Streetwise and how you get folks involved that you're trying to reach. So I haven't seen the numbers in the last few years, but not everyone still owns a smartphone. And how do you kind of get past the same thing that you get in an open house or whatever, which is there's a very small number of motivated people who show up. You're talking about data, and you're talking about change. Change can happen with a small number of motivated people, and that's great. But to get the data, you need the representativeness. How do you balance that off, and what are you doing to get out there and get to people, and hopefully what can we learn from that?
That's great question. Well, first of all, it'd be great if many of you want to use the platform. So that's one way to get it out there, and those of you who are interested, let's exchange cards and keep talking about that. But we followed a really particular strategy, much like Yelp, okay? And Yelp has some really amazing case studies out there. When Yelp starts, they basically want to get everyday people to use the platform. That's their aspiration. And the way that Yelp did it was they picked selected cities across the United States, and they had something called the Elite Squad. The Elite Squad is just sort of a fancy name for a party, right? So they would have these parties where they brought people together, and at the end of the party, people would leave using Yelp, okay? And we've researched that and have been thinking very strategically about having streetwise block parties, right? In many places they have block captains, especially on the East Coast, less so on the West Coast. But you have these block parties, and you bring people together just like this who live in the same neighborhood or same community, and you have the party around exchanging goods and services that would make your life easier. Because that's what Streetwise is really about. So that's a fun party to go to, because you're leaving, right, with more information about how to make your own life easier. right? And then you leave using the platform. And so one of our strategies, that's sort of our grassroots strategy. Another strategy is to partner with organizations. So as I mentioned, Eco Districts is here, based in Portland, and we are one of the implementation partners for their target cities. And so, in a nutshell, partnering with coalitions like Eco Districts, like the California Endowments Building Healthy Communities, right? That's another way to roll out the platform. And so those are our strategies thus far about how to get everyday people to use the platform. On the platform, you can find social services, you can rank the quality of the social or public services, and you can connect and share social or public services in the same way that people share music. You can now share, hey, this is what allowed Alan to get great childcare. So now you can share that with OnTweet. And so we're thinking that that's going to be our way of really getting a lot of users. Thank you for the question. Next question.
Have you done any thinking or have any experience with getting smartphones into prisons?
You know, I haven't thought about, they took my phone. You know, so let me draw on my own experience. I think that's a great question, and I'm certainly interested in working with that population and not giving them jobs, but giving them careers, right? And so that's more how I've been thinking about it, that this is a population that instead of being exploited, as they often are, and many folks can't even get a job once you have a felony on your record, I've really been thinking about giving that population second and third chances, depending on what the offense is, and hiring them to work on the Streetwise platform. So that's how.
I'm pretty practical and down to earth. Walk me through step by step what we would do to actually get something like this started in a community here in Portland. What staff do we need? What resources? What connections? What's it going to cost? How long is it going to take? And how many people have to be involved?
Well, I really love how practical you are, and a lot of that we should talk about offline, but it's a really great question. Basically, a lot of it depends on your geographic size and scope, but the tool is free to individuals, right? The cost of using the tool really comes around the data analysis piece, right? And I can sort of talk to you about what that looks like in real time. But we'd have to have a more specific conversation about how large of a community are you looking to serve, how many people are in the community, what are the language issues that come up in that particular community, questions such as that. And then we would customize the platform to fulfill the specific needs of your community. So everyone, this has been great. I mean, I could stay here with you all day, but unfortunately I just got the Time's Up card. So I want to thank everybody once again for your time, and I want to really thank CLF for inviting me to speak. I think this is what CLF means. It's really not enough to create just a livable future. I think we want a thriving future, and I think that's what CLF is all about. And so thank you so much for coming today. Have a great day.